Welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar. My name is Ashley Limbers and I'm the marketing coordinator at Total Computer Solutions. Total Computer Solutions is the leading provider of business technology here in Central North Carolina. Today we are presenting Is Cloud Computing Right for Your Business? Presented by Barry Utesch. Just a little housekeeping before we get started. If you have any questions during the presentation, please type them into the Q&A box in your Zoom control panel, and I'll bring them up at the end of our presentation. Now, without further ado, we will turn the time over to Barry. Our presenter today is the founder and president of Total Computer Solutions. He has over 36 years of experience helping businesses with their computer technology. So without further ado, Barry.
Oops, got to unmute my mic. Thank you so much, Ashley, and appreciate folks being here. Look forward to spending the next 30 minutes or so with you and talking about cloud computing. It is one of the topics that we get asked questions about most frequently. And so without further ado, the key points I want to cover today, obviously there's been many advances with hosted servers and other viable alternative solutions. Want to talk a little bit about the benefits for moving to the cloud, and then kind of how we begin that process, which is typically we want to have a conversation. And so advances, I'll ask this question, and again, we'll ask it kind of rhetorically, but what was the roadblock to going to the cloud 5 years ago? Just think about that for a moment. I would contend that the biggest roadblock was bandwidth. There are other issues certainly, but if you think back, the cost of bandwidth or just the ability to get a big pipe into your business, that was a huge hindrance to moving your servers to the cloud. You know, we hear a lot in terms of benefits. We hear a lot about the price, right? It's cheaper operating out of the cloud, and although that certainly can be true, we would suggest that that's not the primary driver. If we look at a 6-year sort of a window of buying on-premise versus hosting in the cloud, we see those coming in pretty close. We have had clients over the years that have retained their servers for 7, even 8 years. And for those folks, because of the fact that they kept that equipment around for such a long time, it was actually a little bit less expensive for them to have on-premise servers when compared to the cloud. And again, assessing your readiness, there is no one size fits all. For some businesses, it makes perfect sense to move most or all of their applications to the cloud. For others, for a variety of reasons, it really doesn't make sense. And so we'll be talking about these key points. But certainly if there are things that I don't touch on that are of interest to you, as Ashley already has mentioned, please feel free to ask questions via the Q&A button on your Zoom meeting. Again, back to the idea of broadband or internet access. This is a little bit hard to read, but there's a map of North Carolina. You can see the white is the unserved or underserved areas. The blue is they have internet, and they have decent internet, but not stellar internet, and typically fewer choices. They might have one provider in that area. And then obviously the RDU, the triangle area, the triad, and then the Charlotte area, they have considered urban areas, and they have many choices, and also the ability to have significant bandwidth. You know, in my own neighborhood here in Greensboro, I have 3 fiber carriers in my yard: AT&T, Spectrum, and North State, all have put fiber in my neighborhood, and that's just choices are prevalent. So if your facility, if your business happens to be located in an area where fiber or high-speed internet is not as available, then the whole cloud conversation really gets stalled. We recently signed a new client, and they're near Star. Star is in the Ashboro vicinity, kind of east of the Uwharrie National Forest. And broadband is not an option for them. They have CenturyLink. The most bandwidth they can get is about 5 meg. And they were asking us about moving to the cloud. And yeah, maybe they could do it successfully, but we would contend that it's unlikely that they will ever be happy with the solution from a performance standpoint, because it's just not enough bandwidth. So again, hosting their email in the cloud, sure. Hosting maybe some simple things in the cloud, sure. But their primary application that does a lot of processing and printing and transporting of data back and forth, our recommendation was no, you're not. You got to wait till the bandwidth gets there. The cost, again, one of the biggest things that has changed, and it has changed dramatically in the last 5 years. 7 years ago, at TCS, we were paying about $500 a month for a T1. Of course, a T1 is about a meg of bandwidth. Today, I'm paying about $400 for 100 meg. So really, it is this transition in internet speeds that has made moving to the cloud a much more viable option. And if we think forward 5 years, you may have gigabit all the way to the desktop. And so at that point, the need to have a server locally is almost non-existent. Fiber optics in general has been a huge win, especially if you talk about using phones, IP phones over your connection. Again, here at TCS, we've experienced dramatic improvements in voice quality based on having a fiber connection versus having a traditional copper connection. It is interesting that even though the internet really came about in the United States, we are typically, excuse me, paying more for broadband access than it happens in many other countries. Excuse me. You may be able to read that chart, maybe not, but London, $24 a month for high speed. Kansas City being $41. So again, excuse me, the cost of bandwidth, as it continues to decline, it becomes much more viable to look at hosting your servers in the cloud. The other thing that's changed dramatically is the applications that are available in the cloud. Software that's been written efficiently to operate over the internet is a significant improvement over trying to pick up an on-premise application and just move it to the internet. Back in 2007, when the iPhone was launched, there was a proliferation of applications that were being written, and that the quality of those applications is so much better today. If you think about it from the software company's perspective, and I'll use Salesforce as an example, if they wrote their application to run on premise, they don't know, or they can't control what operating system you're running on. You might be running on Server 2008, you might be running on Server 2012, you might be running Windows 7, you might be running Windows 8 or Windows 10. the complexity for them of supporting their application was significantly greater. With Salesforce being a pure cloud application, really the only question they have for you when they're trying to troubleshoot is what version of Internet Explorer or Google Chrome or one of the others are you running? And obviously there may be preferences there, but it's easy enough to add Google if you don't have it, or add Internet Explorer if you don't have it. Again, thinking about supporting those applications, used to be that they would send you CDs with some level of frequency, and you'd have to install those applications on your server. Maybe you did it, maybe you didn't. Again, by hosting their application in the cloud, they are able to have much tighter controls about what version you're running, and if the support of that application then becomes much simpler. They're not having to support a lot of legacy versions. They're just supporting the most current. There are applications that that do not play well in the cloud. We have a client that had an ERP system. That ERP system would not run in a virtual environment, which is really required if it's going to be cloud-based. And so that is a continuing challenge, although certainly less today than it was 4 or 5 years ago, because more and more of them are moving their applications this direction. So benefits of moving to the cloud. With on-premise equipment, again, an initial deployment of servers is complex, time-consuming. It costs a lot of money buying new servers, and then it is a static environment for about 5 years. So if you are growing very rapidly, you may have to purchase additional servers because the ones that you bought a few years ago aren't able to keep up. If by chance you're shrinking in size, same problem. You've paid for these servers and the capacity that they have. If you only need half that capacity today, well, it's just kind of, those servers are just kind of idling or almost wasted. One of the things that we have done for a number of clients is move them from on-premise to private cloud. In a private cloud environment, you're using essentially that same infrastructure that used to exist on-premise, but you're now hosting that in a data center where you do have redundant power, you have redundant internet connections, you certainly have more data stability and security. And the fact that it's in a data center, it's behind a more robust firewall. And in most cases, in that situation, your capital expenses, the purchasing of new servers, is avoided, and so those upfront costs are lower. And then public cloud is really things like Salesforce, Office 365, Google Docs. That's what when I say public cloud. And so those things can be deployed very quickly. To sign up for Office 365, you just log in, tell them what your email address is, and give them your credit card information. Admittedly, getting all of your existing email into that environment takes some effort, but in terms of actually getting up and running, it can be very, very fast. The scalability and availability of that is certainly better than what you would achieve hosting on-site, and it is a fairly low-cost solution for most folks. Again, doesn't always equate to a lower cost solution, but certainly for the small business, it is certainly that. Redundancy. The cloud offers a level of availability that would be nearly impossible to build on site. The redundant servers, I'm thinking about a client that maybe has a server with 3 to 5 hard drives in it in a RAID array, and contrasting that with what they might have in a cloud solution where they're buying virtual servers, where there are hundreds of hard drives that are there ready and waiting. And if you lose a drive or lose a couple drives out of 100, it's a non-event. Whereas if you have 5 hard drives and you lose a couple, that could be a significant problem. So again, when we look at the cloud offering versus the on-premise offering, the ability to build what you get with a cloud offering on-premise would almost be it would be cost prohibitive. So the availability of cloud solutions is really one of the main benefits. Similar to what I would describe as an aircraft redundancy, in a typical airplane, there are 2 of everything, and that's for so that if one fails, the other one picks up. So, so assessing readiness, I mentioned at the beginning that cloud is not necessarily a fit for everyone. And so certainly one of the first questions that we want to ask is, does your software work in the cloud? And then the next question on that would be, does the company who writes that software offer that product as a service where you can just actually purchase it from them? But again, starting with back with our bullet points, the age of server hardware is an early question. If the servers are a year old or 2-year-old, unless there's an issue or a rapid growth, we might suggest it makes more sense for you to look at the cloud in a few years once those servers reach the kind of their end of life. If your servers are at end of life, that's a good time to assess whether the cloud makes sense for you. Again, I mentioned the primary application. If your application doesn't operate properly in the cloud, then that's a deal breaker. We do get the questions asked about the company's growing rapidly, and how does our technology keep up? And certainly the cloud has a huge advantage there, because if you need an additional terabyte of disk space, it's very easy for us to spin that up and provide that to you. If you need extra servers, et cetera, those things are can be done very quickly. One of the other things that drives clients to use cloud applications is the availability or the ability to work from anywhere. I'm thinking about a client that has about 8 stores, and they used to host all of their servers in their main office. Well, when the main office lost power during an ice storm, that meant that all of the 7 or 8 branches were out of business as well, even though there weren't ice storms where those branches were. And so again, for them to get the high availability that power's not going to disrupt us, a broken internet connection's not going to disrupt all of our stores if we are in a hosted environment. Limited office space is certainly a factor. We see in high-rise buildings that office space can be very expensive, and if you're having to dedicate a room to housing your servers, that could be an office. That's a factor. And then certainly power, right? There's power to run the devices. There's power to cool because they do generate quite a bit of heat, and so a reclaiming of office space is certainly a benefit. Cultural fit. This is probably one of the trickier ones for us to navigate, and I'll use law firms as an easy example. We do quite a bit of business with law firms, and some attorneys are very comfortable with having things in the cloud, and others would say, I really like the ability to walk down the hall and put my hand on the server and say, you know what, I know all my data is right here. It's a cultural or it's not a, anyway, that it's not right or wrong. It's just what folks are comfortable with. So things to consider, again, is your line of business software supported in the cloud? Do you have adequate bandwidth to operate? How stable is the power in your office? And then are there compliance or security regulations that your entity has that either would drive you towards the cloud or potentially drive you away? I was visiting with a dental practice in Winston a few months back, and I was asking the practice administrator about their HIPAA compliance because it's something that is often overlooked. And she responded, "We really don't have HIPAA issues." And I asked her to elaborate, and she said, "Well, we're using an application that is hosted by the vendor. It's all cloud-based." And she said, "So there is absolutely no patient health information stored on any of our computers or anywhere in this office electronically. All of that is stored in the cloud." So admittedly, they're counting on their application vendor to be compliant, but that's, again, no PHI on the PCs, no PHI in the office on any of the computers, made her job significantly easier. And we are seeing some instances where application vendors are no longer supporting the on-premise app. You know, they've basically said our app is now a cloud-based app. You've got to use it that way, and that's another, I guess, driver or thing to consider. Again, as we look at the model of cloud versus on-premise, we really shift the costs from being a capital expenditure to being an operating expenditure. And again, not necessarily one that's right and one that's wrong. We at TCS have a spreadsheet that we've built, and where when the client wants to think about this, we're able to plug in all the information in terms of on-premise, what it would cost, ongoing maintenance of on-premise, et cetera. And then we also compare that against, okay, if you were to do this in the cloud instead of building the on-premise, and what is your cost benefit there? And certainly you have to take into account that the on-premise is not nearly as robust a solution as what you're able to do in the cloud. But just dollar for dollar, as you compare the two, we find that it comes out very close if you look at a 5 or 6 year window. So to recap, lots of advances have been made in hosted servers, and they certainly are a viable alternative. There are significant benefits for moving to the cloud, and again, we would suggest that those are reliability and stability. It's a reduction of capital expenses, and then the ability to really operate from anywhere. You become much more mobile when your solutions are cloud-based as opposed to on-premise. And then assessing the cloud, it really begins with a conversation. It's not necessarily a fit for everyone, but we do believe that we're convinced that it's the future, and we're helping clients every day to move in that direction. So again, thank you for being part of our webinar today. We do have a free ebook that we'd like to send to you if you haven't seen this already, and Ashley will be getting that out. And we are going to ask folks who have questions to please submit those now, and then Ashley will read those, and then I will respond. So appreciate your being here, and please ask questions if you have them.
Thank you, Barry. We'll go ahead and take some time for questions now. Just a reminder, please be sure to type your questions into the question box in the control panel, and we'll wait about a minute or two to see if anyone has any questions. Okay, so it looks like we have a few questions. Scott is asking, the cloud seems to be rather expensive. I have looked at Citrix ShareFile.
So what Citrix ShareFile is a file sharing location, and you can achieve some of that same functionality through Office 365 and using OneDrive, or Office 365 and using SharePoint. Again, Citrix, I would describe Citrix as a premium product. We've used it over the years. We put a lot of Citrix servers in back before terminal services from Microsoft became as robust as it is today. If you'd like to talk with us about alternative on that, we'd be happy to do that. But again, I would encourage you to look at Office 365 and their OneDrive and SharePoint products and compare that. There may be some things that Citrix is doing for you that make sense, but certainly I would suggest that there are other options besides Citrix that may work for you. Good question. Thank you.
Okay, this is kind of a two-parter. So is it safe for my data to be in the cloud and also when converting to the cloud?
So the question about is my data safe in the cloud? The short answer to that is yes. That doesn't completely relieve you of kind of due diligence in being secure in general. If you think about it from a high level, if your data is in the cloud and it's in a data center, that data center has a much more robust firewall, a much more robust security team than the typical small or medium-sized business. So from the bad guy's perspective, it'd be a lot easier to hack into your small or medium-sized business than it would be to hack into a data center. Now, if I get crypto on my laptop and my laptop syncs the files up to my cloud provider, they're just as encrypted as they would be, or as they are on my laptop. So again, there's still due diligence on the user's part or the business's part to prevent unwanted hacking for taking place. But in general, and I go back to maybe my analogy of the dental practice where their application was completely hosted in the cloud, and so the burden, if you will, to protect that data fell to their application vendor, and it was relieved. They were relieved of that burden. Do they still need antivirus on all their desktops? Do they still need to train their users not to click on things that they shouldn't click on? Absolutely. But you know, their risk and their level of protection in that particular instance is greater in the cloud than what it would be on site if they had on-site servers and on-site applications. Another good question.
Okay, great. And Amy is asking, what is the biggest advantage of being in the cloud?
I would suggest the biggest advantage is the robustness of the environment, how do I say that another way? The availability or just the lack of downtime. And again, back to the thinking about a physical server in your office. If you lose power, if you lose internet, that server's off. In addition, if you had 3 hard drives that are or 5 hard drives in a RAID array where you can lose 1 hard drive and the RAID keeps running. You can lose 2 hard drives and it will be much slower, but it will continue to run. If you lose 3 hard drives out of 5, you're down. If you move that same server into a virtual environment in a data center, again, now instead of 5 hard drives, you've got literally hundreds, maybe even thousands of hard drives. And so the likelihood of a hard drive failure taking your server down becomes minuscule. And again, same with power, same with internet connectivity, and really in a virtual environment, that would be true even for the entire server itself, because if the server was to fail, you can immediately bring it up on a different piece. If the hardware failed, you can bring it up on a new piece of hardware and be operating in a few minutes, as opposed to if that was an on-site server, it might take days or a day to get parts in and get your server back going again. So again, redundancy and reliability would be the short answer.
Okay, and our next question, how do you best address performance?
So performance is a concern or a consideration. What we have seen over the past couple of years as we've moved clients to the cloud, probably the number one hindrance to performance is bandwidth. If folks don't have adequate bandwidth, and even I'll say even further, if they don't have fiber with adequate bandwidth, then performance becomes a concern. But the cloud, again, if we have a server in the cloud that's not performing well, essentially we can give it more processing power or give it more RAM or give it more disk space through just a few clicks of a mouse, and then shut the server down, bring it back up, and it takes advantage of those enhancements that we have just added. So the ability to improve performance is much easier with a cloud-based server than it would be for an on-premise server, where I would have to order parts and hope there's room inside the server for those to fit.
Okay, and we have a user asking, do we have any experience with net documents?
Do we have any experience with net documents? I don't know if that's a name of a specific application or if that's a general term. So I can't answer that question. I don't really know what net documents is or what they mean by net documents. Sorry.
Okay. Next question. Would you recommend a backup internet connection if you are relying on the cloud?
It's a great question. And absolutely, if your primary application exists in the cloud, I would absolutely recommend a backup internet connection. And we really like to put in an automatic failover. You can set up a firewall where it has 2 internet connections, and then if the one connection fails, then the firewall fails over automatically to the other connection, so that the users don't necessarily know that the one internet connection has been lost. So yeah, we would absolutely recommend that. And that's part of where I mentioned earlier that it's, on the one hand, they say it's less expensive, but if you have to purchase a second internet connection and pay for that every month, then that doesn't lend itself to huge cost savings over on-premise. Again, it depends, but absolutely recommend a second connection.
It looks like we've covered all of our questions. Barry, is there anything else you wanted to include before we wrap up?
Well, I just want to thank folks for being here. We sincerely appreciate an opportunity to speak to you about cloud computing. Again, we've been helping clients do this for probably close to 5 years, and really are subject matter experts on this. And so if it's something that you're considering doing, we would welcome an opportunity to speak with you. There is no charge for an initial conversation on that. And so, yeah, be happy to entertain any folks that are interested in starting that conversation. So, Ashley, appreciate it.
Great. Thank you, everyone. We appreciate you being here. Thanks again for joining us today, and we will see you next time.